Hi everybody, this is Dr. OG from MP Skills Made Easy Workshops, and you're listening to the Prescriber Essentials podcast, the show that helps you delve into the world of clinical skills and knowledge for clinicians who love to continually improve their clinical skills. I discuss content to help you grow professionally and the opportunities and strategies to provide excellent care like a pro. Welcome to our show on resume writing and new grad NP interviewing skills. My name is Dr. OG, and I have two special guests for you today. I have Cheryl McNeil, who is a nurse educator, a nurse consultant, and has experience preparing new grad nurses for the workforce. And Erin Miller is a nurse practitioner who has tons of experience in clinical practice. You will learn all you need to write an excellent resume and get ready for your NP job interview. We're so excited to have Cheryl and Erin join us today. And if you're a new grad, you're in for a treat. Be sure to take notes and enjoy.
Hi, everyone. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is about resume writing itself. Now, your resume is actually your calling card. It's a tool that you have to get you the interviews. So, some people think, well, I need to make it flash or whatever along that line. You need to put in here what the potential employer is looking for. This is your introduction without your being there. Your resume is what gets you the interview itself. It needs to tell a story about you. The purpose of that resume is they need to be able to scan across this and see who you are. They need to know what it is you know, what you've done, what have you accomplished, and what is it that you want to do. You may reference in there what you're meeting in regards to their goals. You need to be sure that your resume is not more than 2 pages unless it is a CV, and that's for academic positions. So you need to make sure you keep it concise. You need to make sure that within that resume, it talks about not only what you've accomplished, but those skills themselves. You need to also be sure that if there's any gaps within your employment that you can address, you can speak to those because they may hone in on those. And you also need to be sure that many of you, you've been in practice for many years. So anything that's beyond 10 years, unless it's relevant to the position that you're currently seeking, you probably want to leave that out. Okay. Now, you want to also be careful that you don't misrepresent any information. When you're writing your resume, you want to make sure that you use action verbs. You want to make sure that you use things like you demonstrate, you can describe, you're responsible for, things along that line. You want to make sure that you're consistent in the format. You want to make sure, if you remember how you've written papers in school, you either used MLS or APA, you want to kind of follow some of those principles in regards to the font size, that it's clear. You want to make sure it's not too busy, that there's not too much information in there. There's not too many words that don't bring relevance to what you're trying to seek. You also may want to do things along the line that have you go out and look at the potential employer's website and see what it is that they identify with their core values, because usually most employers use tools to scan multiple resumes, and they may look at keywords that such as your integrity or such as time management responsible, anything along that line that you may be able to incorporate into this resume would potentially flag your resume as a potential hire. You also want to be careful that when you're formatting this, that you stick to either one or the other as far as formatting. Now, there are functional resumes and there are chronological resumes. Most of us use a chronological resume. It basically means from current to past, and you're looking at what you've done and you incorporate in that time frames. There are some folks that prefer to use a functional resume. As I said, this is your calling card, so it's whatever works best for you. And in that functional resume, you're going to format it in a manner that lists what your skill sets are, what your accomplishments are, and you'll create it that way. If you have significant gaps in your work history, this may be a better format for you. Now, I know this is kind of humorous, but you would not believe some of the resumes that I have seen in my lifetime. As you can see, it's very, very busy. And there's a lot of things on here that probably are important information to include, but the format in which they've been presented makes it very difficult for the person or the tool that's reviewing the resume to actually scan it and gather what's appropriate. Now, if you look on the side there where it says software knowledge and it lists all those Adobe formats there, I probably wouldn't even include that because you need to be sure that whatever you're doing in this forum is relevant to the position itself. And don't you like her picture? That was a great idea, I thought there. Now, things that a good resume should do is it should allow you to sell yourself to the employer. You want to be careful when you're presenting this and your information that it's very concise and specific. For example, if you are responsible for seeing 35 patients a day, unless that employer has something in which to base that upon, it may or may not give them relevance. If you're already an experienced NP, if you're someone who has management experience and you saved $5,000 in expenses in a month, you need to be able to put that in a format that they can truly correlate what it means. For example, if your expenses were $10,000 a month and you saved $5,000, that's pretty significant. But if your expenses were $450,000 a month and you save $5,000, it doesn't bring the value that you would like to be able to present. So put it in a format that references percentages because it makes it clear, it makes it concise. When you're referencing accolades, be sure that you specify those in such a way that it's clear. And also, as I referenced before, pulling out keywords, not only from their core values, but from the job description itself. They may specify their specific years of experience. Well, if you're a first-time nurse practitioner, you may have experience in cardiology as a care provider rather than a nurse practitioner. So you may want to incorporate that as well. Okay, here's an example of some resume writing. And this is a tool in here that you can use. If you take a look down here, it's going to reference how to input your name, your job, what you've done. It's chronological, so you're going to use the dates in there. So for a new grad, you may want to add your clinical locations if you have never worked in an arena that shows family practice or cardiology. So you may want to include that. If you're an experienced nurse practitioner, you probably want to stay away from the clinical experience unless you've never worked in the arena before. You also want to look at what you've got that are transferable skills. So for example, if you were in a leadership position or a charge role, and you were responsible for assignments and coordinating the schedule, coordinating patient throughput, those are techniques and skills that you can incorporate into your resume that can be transferred over into the roles of nurse practitioner. Now, the most important thing on your resume should be your name and your contact information. The next most important thing is your education. You want to let them know that you now are a nurse practitioner when you graduated. After that becomes your experience. So when you format your resume, if you do that in such a way that captures it in this manner, it's going to be very helpful for the interviewer. And the last thing I want to reference on the actual resume itself is if you take a look down below on this one and it talks about skills, you want to be sure that any skills that you list on here, they should reflect proficiency, not just the knowledge of the technique themselves. Because if they're looking between you and another potential hire, and you say on here that you're proficient in the MR charting and you list the specific software that you know, and then you get hired on and you're really just only aware of it or you've been exposed to it, you've misrepresented yourself. So you want to be sure that, those skills that you list are really those that you're proficient in. I want to caution you in regards to listing all your clinical skills, because what can occur with that is you may omit one. Because as a nurse and as a nurse practitioner, you know that there's a multitude of skills that you can include on here that just basic space would not permit for. So those are really things that you want to be able to speak to when you get into the actual interview. All right. Now, the cover letter is really a way to address things that you can't really get into your resume or you can't list on the application. So it's kind of a way of wrapping up, dressing up your application, your resume, and putting a bow on top. So you want to be sure that the information on here is clear, it's concise. You want to make sure your cover letter is never more than a page long. And you want to make sure that when you're writing this, that you're telling them why you would be an asset, why you would be a good fit for this job, and what it is that you could bring to the organization so that they can see that you might perhaps be the better option than perhaps applicant number 2 or number 3. And again, if there is an option to upload this cover letter with your application, that's the best way. If there's not, it's perfectly acceptable to bring these with you. Just be prepared that you may need to answer any questions related to what you have written in this cover letter itself. So you want to be sure that anything you present on here that's very clear and that you can speak to it later if needed. You've got your resume, it's been sent in, it's been flagged, and now you've got the interview. So what you want to be sure is that you need to be prepared for it. You need to be prepared for that job search and interview. So you need to take time to consider. It's not just about, will they hire you? Are they the right place for you to work? When you take a look at the core values, you take a look at all the job listings, and you look at what it's stating that the position requires. Is it really a fit? For example, if you are applying for a pediatric nurse practitioner role and you don't really care for children or pediatrics, maybe that's not a fit for you. Maybe it's not a place that you're going to be content and happy with. You need to look at also the type of environment in which you'd like to work. Do you want to work in a clinic? Do you want to work in private practice? Do you want to work in a community or with indigent patients? Do you want to work in acute care or hospital? And so be sure as you're looking for this, so that's a fit for where you can see yourself. Now, when you're preparing for this, you need to be sure and research the company. Find out what they stand for. If you have if you're looking to help in a surgical arena and you have a personal opinion against certain types of procedures, perhaps it's abortions, perhaps it's sterilization, whatever it might be, and you're going to work in an area in which they do these procedures, you need to be sure, does that fit what you believe? Does that fit your values? Is it a good match? So you also, when you're looking for these companies, do you want something who's interested in philanthropic exercises, et cetera? So you want to make sure that, does it meet that need for you? You want to make sure, or do they have community involvement? Is that something that you're interested in? Are you interested in working with the homeless? Do they have an outreach program? So be sure that whatever it is that they state is in their mission and vision is something that matches what you want to do. Now, when you get ready to prepare for this interview, understand that 91% of employers have already checked out your social media. So it is a good advice for you to clean it up. Be sure that you don't have anything on here that's controversial, any posts that are controversial, any posts that reflect that you're having a good time. Keep it neutral. And although there has been litigation out there that could be discrimination, if you're looking at that potential social media site, it's still being done. And so don't discount that. Additionally, with that, make sure that your email address is professional. It reflects what you want them to think about you. If you're a great partier, socialite, I don't know, I necessarily would say social butterfly at pdq.net is your email address. That may not be appropriate. You want to do something with your name, something that they can follow up with you, because you want to make sure that your reflection of you is the way that you want them to see you, as well as a potential employer. Okay. And it also reflects upon your decision making. They want to be sure that if you can make good decisions about things that are personal like this, that you will also do the same in the work environment. Now, as referenced on here, according to Glassdoor, the best time to interview is 10:30 in the morning on Tuesday. So you want to avoid being on the Mondays and on the Fridays, if at all. You want to avoid times when people may be tired, when they may be spent, or they may be overworked. Okay. Now, you've got the interview. You're getting in there. You got to figure out what to wear. CareerBuilder.com references wear neutral colors. Stay black or navy. You may be very expressive, but this is not the time in which to do so. Make sure that you're comfortable. Make sure that you look professional. Stay conservative. And I've had students tell me, well, I look like my grandma. Well, it very well may be your grandma that's interviewing you. So you want to be sure that whatever you're doing along this line reflects good decision making. So if you're looking at suits, for females, if it's dresses, be sure that it's long enough that when you sit down, they don't ride up, because you have no idea the form in which you're going to be interviewing, whether it's a table arena or if it's a desk. You want to make sure that it's very simple. You want to make sure your jewelry is minimal. You want to, for men, you want to avoid loud colors for ties and shirts. And of course, we all should know, do not interview in your scrubs. Even if you're just getting off work, figure out some way either to have it scheduled a time that you're not working, or that you have time in which to change. Do not go to the interview in your scrubs. Avoid loud colors, especially if you're doing a Zoom. You want things you don't want it to be too busy. You don't want it to be too distractive. You want to make sure your clothes are not form-fitting. They're not too low as far as the front, as far as necklines. You want to avoid polo shirts for men, and avoid those casual socks. Also avoid very high-heeled shoes. Keep your heels at a normal height. I actually can tell you of a nurse leader in an organization that when the applicant came in with very high heels, she took her on a walking interview. She was responsible for 3 floors, and she made sure that applicant walked all 3 floors via the stairs. So you want to make sure that's good decision making along there. Okay. Be sure that for females, your purse is not overly oversized and clunky, because if you are sitting in an interview itself and you sit it down and it falls over, nothing's more distracting than having everything fall out. So keep it concise. If you decide not to carry a bag and you walk in with you want just your keys and what you need, be sure that when you put your purse in your trunk, you don't lock your keys in your trunk. There's nothing more frustrating and throw you off your game for the interview than to do that. For men, you see how conservative and sleek and detailed their suits looks. Very appropriate. Understand you only have one chance to make that first good impression. So that first impression initially was probably done via the Facebook, but you want to make sure that when you actually get in there, that they're going to make their impression and their opinion of you within the first 2 minutes. So you want to make sure it's a good one. So when you're having the conversation and they're asking you all these questions, you need to take a step back and just evaluate. It's not about just do they want you, but do you want to work there? And as I said before, checking their core values, but also checking their mission and their vision. Are their priorities in line with your priorities? The interview is supposed to be an opportunity for you to get to know one another. And most people don't think of it that way. They think of it's just a screening process for them to get a job. It's really, now at this level, it's a career, it's a fit. And you want to be sure that if you feel uncomfortable in the interview, that maybe that's a flag you need to pay attention to. It's sort of like when you go to Starbucks and you sit down with someone you don't know because you just need a place at the table, and you begin a conversation. You know, if you connected initially, you know, if you have things in common. A good interviewer should be able to make you feel relaxed and should be able to at that point begin a conversation. And that's what this is really about. Now, there are several types of interviews, especially in our COVID area. We've seen an increase within the Zoom and the Skype interview types, but usually they will start with a phone interview. And don't always think that the phone interview is going to be conducted by the HR person. It may or may not. It may actually be the hiring decision maker. And usually, if you're going to work in a clinic or an office, it will not be the physician at the first point. But you want to be sure that when you're having this conversation, that they can hear the smile in your voice. You want to be sure that in the conversation you feel more at ease and you're able to talk with each other. It may be that these initial questions are just screening questions. They may ask you some specific questions related to your experience as a nurse practitioner, but usually they're more about, are you a fit culturally? Are you a fit in regards to what they're looking for as far as the personality than it is to the skill set at this level? Okay. After that point, you may have panel interviews. Just to be sure, within a panel interview, they often make people uncomfortable because there's a lot of note-taking going on. Don't let it distract you. They oftentimes will have a format of questions in which to ask. So you want to be sure that whoever asks you the question, that you look at them and you answer it. And then you may then at that point move your eye contact to some of the others in the room. Don't be distracted by their writing. It's not a bad sign, okay? If you can do anything wrong in an interview, the first thing that you would do is to arrive late. And I understand things happen. You may live in a large city. There may be construction. You may not be sure where you're supposed to go, but plan accordingly. Give yourself plenty of time to be there and to arrive and to park. And when you get there, the good interviewer may ask you questions along the line. Did you have any trouble getting there? No, you were, you scattered it out. Don't arrive more than about 10 minutes early. Be polite and kind to whoever is the gatekeeper or that you may have met in the interview, in the elevator itself, because you don't know who it is that you're actually talking with. So you want to be sure that you get all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. Be very conscious of both verbal and nonverbal communication, the manner in which you present yourself, the manner in which you connect or not connect. May or may not make them feel comfortable, may or may not make the gatekeeper, who was the receptionist out front, feel comfortable. So you want to be sure that you're polite and considerate and that your mannerism meets what their core values are. So you make sure your message is correct. If you are concerned about where it is you're supposed to be going, try and map it out beforehand so that you've not got any issues in that regards. If you're nervous about interviewing, it's a great technique to chew gum. But don't forget to spit it out before you walk into the actual interview itself. Chewing gum releases excess energy, and so that's a good thing to do, okay? Also remember, silence your cell phones. And if you have a cell phone that really vibrates quite a bit, then maybe you want to turn it off, because nothing's worse than having your bag or your pocket vibrate during an interview, all right? Now, when we get into the interview questions themselves, you want to be sure that you answer all questions truthfully. You want to, and they may ask you some that may make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, or they may ask you some that you really don't have an answer to. It is perfectly acceptable to ask them to repeat a question or for you to restate it to make sure that you've understood it correctly. So we're going to go through some sample questions they may ask. Initially, a good interviewer, to try to get you to relax, may start off the interview asking you, tell me a little about yourself. They don't want you to tell them everything. They don't necessarily want to hear about things that are not related to the job. So when you're telling them about yourself, you're telling them about how you can be an asset to the organization and what you're bringing to the table based upon your skill sets. You're briefly describing why you're the best candidate. And remember that if you open the door to something that they legally cannot ask you, such as, do you have children, et cetera? If you talk about that in this point and you talk about personal characteristics, they then can pursue the questions about that later. So just be cautious in regards to what it is you actually say. Now, additionally, they may ask you, these are the general things. What are your strengths? And most people kind of struggle with talking about what they're good at. But remember, this is your chance to sell yourself. So you should always prepare a list of things that you're really good with. And don't just prepare one, prepare three. I've seen panel interviews when they ask, tell me three things that you're really good about. We always say at least do two, but talk about things that you can support and back up in regards to examples, such as I have a positive attitude, I'm organized, I'm disciplined, I have strong determination to succeed, things along that line. On the flip side of that, they may ask you, what is it your greatest weakness? They may say, what is it you struggle the most with? What is it that you would like to overcome? They may ask it in a multitude of ways, but regardless, it usually causes applicants to stumble a bit. So when they're talking about this, never say none, because we all have things we need to work on. But you want to be sure that whatever it is you reference, you can then turn it around to where it looks as a strength. So for example, you may say that I struggle with public speaking, but you may say something that I'm now taking a Toastmasters class, or I'm pursuing further education, or I have been able to overcome some of this with the preparation that I've had within my graduate school. So you can reference things that helps them see that you recognize that you do have something you need to work on, which we all do, and that you're doing things in which to improve on that. Another example is, what is your long-term objective? You want to be sure to focus on clear goals that are within 3 to 5 years and how do you want to reach it. Caution to, if you're saying to them that I want to go back to school to get my doctorate so that I can teach, then they may be thinking that you're looking at their position as just a stepping stone to get something else. So be sure that your long-term objective is something that can be tied to that employer itself. You've gone through the questions and there's still the uncertainty about what they may ask next. A big question that's being asked a lot with is, tell me about a difficult situation. Tell me what you did to overcome it. They may ask questions that are related to ethical or unethical behavior, or how did you work toward resolution with personality conflicts? So, first of all, you can never, or you should never say that you've never had a difficult situation, because I do know employers that at that point will say, for them, the resume is over at that point, because they're really not only trying to determine how did you work through it, but can you even recognize a difficult situation? And we've all had them. So what you're trying to do is just pull in some of the techniques and skills that you've had. Be sure that you're unbiased. Don't place blame on others, and always end on a positive note. Don't try to throw someone under the bus. Never ever reference difficulty with a prior employer if you can prevent it. And if some of them, if they hadn't come forward and said, hey, I know where you work, that's really a difficult unit, just politely say it can be a challenge and let it go at that. Don't let them draw you into a conversation you may not be comfortable with later. Another question that's a great one for you to sell yourself is, how has your education prepared you for your career choice? Now, they may never ask you this, so this is a good one in which you could try to incorporate in to just comments and regarding yourself and what you've done in the past, because you want to be sure that if you're applying for a position that you don't have prior experience, such as you're becoming a family nurse practitioner, but your career has been in a med-surg unit or a cardiology unit, that you can incorporate what you've learned in school that'll help you get there. And another question that's a big one that I always ask at the end of an interview. I always ask, why should I hire you and why do you want to work here? And you need to be able to convey to them what it is that you bring to the table, why they want you. For example, Harris Health has got a new question that they talk about, how have you incorporated your diversity and inclusion within your practice. So there are newer questions out there, but you want to be able to articulate well what value you bring to their organization. Okay? You should always have a question or two to ask them, because this is your time to not only determine is it a fit, but what it is about them that might make it a good place to work. At this point, it is not appropriate to talk about salary. If you do go through the entire interview process at the first time, there is a later point in which that is acceptable. But at this point, you want to be sure that you're trying to determine what it is that they're proud of. You may ask them things that, what's the greatest accomplishment they've had in the unit? What is it, something that they struggle with? You want to give them a chance to brag about what it is they're doing. Another question that I'll sometimes ask is, especially with a panel interview, is, how long who's been here the longest? How long have you worked here? Because that's a red flag if the person speaks up and says, oh, I've been here the longest. I've been here 2 years. So you want to be careful and consider that when you're talking with the interview. I actually had a position once that I looked at that it turned down because the longest person had not even been there a year. And it was a panel of 6 people. All right. Now, for new nurse practitioners, you need to be able to be prepared to speak to clinical case studies that they may present. You may need to be prepared to talk about how you set priorities, your clinical knowledge, and why did you want to be a nurse practitioner in the first place. And a little bit later, Erin's going to talk about some of those specific case studies for you. Now, the interview ends. You want to be sure that you remain professional. You want to be sure you didn't fall into one of those traps that they try to get you to relax so much and get comfortable that you relax too much. You want to be cautious that you remain professional throughout. You want to be sure that you shake the interviewer's hand at the end and ask for their business card, because you want to be sure to follow up and always, always tell them thank you. It is appropriate to send a thank you card when you end, One of the things that we've learned in this digital era that an email thank you card is just as acceptable as handwritten. And oftentimes, because handwritten is so delayed getting there, a decision may be made before they ever receive it. So be sure that you get a method in which to reach out to them at that point. You want to be sure that you include everyone that you've interviewed with. You in that thank you follow up. You want to be sure that you again succinctly summarize why you were the best person for the position. You want to be sure that you're grammatically correct in how you write it up, and to try to seal it, kind of close the deal. It's kind of like a salesperson at that point. Okay.
So I'm going to just review briefly some clinical questions that you, as nurse practitioners, most likely will not only encounter as a provider in practice, but you may also encounter these questions during an interview. And it really probably just depends on what type of clinic you're going to be interviewing for. An interview, during the interview, it has the potential to be made up of several different types of questions, as Cheryl already went over. There can be personal questions, personnel questions, and then clinical questions as well. And so this, I just want you guys to remember that what we're going to talk about here is only 6 of them listed. They're by no means an exhaustive list of all the types of clinical questions that you will be asked. Again, it really probably depends on the population and the setting, which will determine what types of questions that you would be asked. But these are pretty common that you would probably need to know as a family practice provider anyway.
If you like what you hear on this show, then be sure to check out our Prescriber Essentials Academy, which is a continuing education platform where we delve deeper. Visit schools.mpskillsmadeeasy.com to join us. See you on the other side.